Greg slammed the paper on the table. My own mother gave her legacy to a shelter, not her son. Casey, his wife, scoffed. She's just being dramatic, she'd never cut you off. But Martha, Greg's mother, already had. The recipe box, the trust, even her final goodbye, gone from him, given to strangers. And across town, the plaque read, "In honor of a mother who chose peace over blood." All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Maple Falls, Illinois, the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Martha adjusted the sleeves of her cardigan as she set the final salad bowl on the oak dining table. The kitchen smelled like sage and browned butter, comfort notes from a recipe she'd made for nearly 4 decades. But comfort tonight had no seat at the table. Casey's voice snapped through the hallway. "Greg, can you please tell your mother again not to put the serving spoons upside down in the gravy boat?" Greg didn't respond. He hovered by the fridge, pretending to search for sparkling water, eyes downcast. It was easier than choosing a side. Martha exhaled, long and silent. She walked over and adjusted the utensils herself. There. No casualties. Casey didn't laugh. She rarely did anymore when Martha was the one speaking. Dinner was late. The kids were upstairs, the turkey half-carved, and Casey had just finished plating when she dropped Martha's portion into the trash with one sharp, practiced flick of her wrist. Martha blinked. "Excuse me?" Casey didn't look up. There wasn't room on the table. Not even for a plate? Casey finally turned. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "You shouldn't be here anyway." The words didn't land like a slap. They landed like a verdict. Greg looked like he might say something, then rubbed his forehead instead. "Let's just eat, all right?" Martha stood motionless for a beat longer, her hands still damp from drying dishes no one noticed her wash. She nodded once, then walked back into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and pulled out a half-empty yogurt cup. Dinner, apparently. She sat alone at the breakfast nook while laughter from the dining room fluttered past her like wallpaper she hadn't chosen. After a while, she pulled out her phone. A text. Simple, with no punctuation. "Can we meet Friday? Something I need to finalize. M." She sent it to one person, Alan Dent, her estate lawyer of 15 years. Then she stood and walked back upstairs, careful not to let her joints creak too loudly. In her borrowed bedroom, the wallpaper peeled in one corner. The closet door never quite latched. Her things fit into one suitcase, a laundry basket, and 2 shelves she never asked to claim. She sat at the edge of the twin bed and pulled open the drawer of the nightstand Greg had sanded for her back in college. Still smelled faintly of cedar and stubborn love. Inside, folded beneath her reading glasses, was a worn manila folder. She opened it. Co-signed mortgage, 2016. After Greg got laid off from his engineering job and Casey had just returned from maternity leave, Martha had offered her name and her savings because that's what mothers do when their children say, "We're drowning and we need you." The deal was always unspoken, stay as long as you need. But lately, the tone had changed. Casey gave her polite smiles only when guests were around. Greg ducked behind work and traffic and late nights. And the smallest things, like Martha folding towels differently, triggered icy silences. Still, Martha said nothing. She cooked, she helped with the baby, she cleaned grout with a toothbrush when no one was home. But that night, when her dinner landed in the trash and Casey didn't even blink, something in Martha calcified. She pulled out her iPad from the drawer, opened her banking app. Her savings had been quietly bleeding into the mortgage auto-pay every month since the cosign. No one had ever asked her to continue, but no one had ever told her to stop either. She stared at the screen. Auto-pay. Active next draft date. November 28th. Her finger hovered, then landed. "Cancel payment?" the app asked. Yes. It was the smallest sound when she pressed it, just a click of confirmation. But in Martha's chest, it thundered. She closed the app, locked the iPad, and folded her hands calmly in her lap. Thanksgiving was still 2 days away. But for her, the feast was over, and the reckoning had just been plated. Maple Falls, November 22nd, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. The house buzzed with forced warmth, cinnamon candles lit in every room, jazz playing low through the Bluetooth speaker, Casey's voice drifting up and down the staircase like artificial sugar. Martha moved silently, one item at a time, into a half-packed cardboard box at the back of her closet. A sweater she rarely wore, a photo frame she'd kept turned down for months, the pewter angel figurine her granddaughter once knocked off the mantel and apologized for with a kiss. She folded tissue between each thing like she was wrapping wounds. Downstairs, she heard Casey instructing the kids not to let Grandma touch the pumpkin pie once it arrived. Her voice sounded bright, chipper even, the version of herself reserved for company. Martha shut the closet and carried the box to the attic stairwell while no one watched. Her room wasn't hers anymore. Not really. She could feel it in the way no one knocked before entering, in how her tea tins were shoved to the back of the cupboard. In the 3 minutes Greg took to answer her, "How was work?" with a grunt and a distracted scroll through his phone. Greg. He hadn't always been this dimmed. There was a time, after college, before life turned hard, when he'd leave sticky notes on her coffee maker. "Thanks for working overtime," one read. "Dinner on me Friday." Back when Casey used to send photos of their newborn with captions like, "Look how she loves your voice already, Martha." She had worn her hair long then, softer, so had her tone. Everything began changing the month Greg lost his job. Martha remembered the conversation clearly. She'd walked in with a casserole, found Casey curled on the couch, a baby monitor humming static beside her. "He's not who I married," Casey had whispered, "and I'm not sure I want to be who I'm becoming." Martha had offered to help. Financially, emotionally, logistically. No judgment. But help had somehow become residency, and residency had somehow become resentment. Now, the picture on the wall near the stairs, an old photo of Greg and Casey on a pier in Michigan, tilted slightly to the left. She adjusted it, then caught her own reflection in the glass. She didn't look defeated. She looked decided. Back upstairs, Martha opened her bottom dresser drawer, the one Greg had built with Charles's old plans. She hadn't looked in it for years. Just old bills, maybe. Yellowed paper. She wasn't sure why she pulled it open now, only that something told her to. And there it was. A note. Just a torn page from a notepad with Charles's handwriting in the slanted way he'd always written grocery lists and apologies. "Never stay where you're not respected." Nothing more. Her breath caught. The scent of cedar lifted faintly from the paper, same as it had the night they unpacked this dresser together after the funeral. She folded it once, slipped it into her jewelry box. Downstairs the doorbell rang. Casey let out a tinkling laugh. "They're here," she called. "Let's keep things festive, people." Martha closed the drawer. She straightened the lapels of her cardigan, pulled her hair back into a loose twist, and looked around her borrowed room. It was still filled with her things, but it wasn't her space. Not anymore. Later that evening, while guests buzzed over wine and pecan tarts, Martha slipped out onto the back porch. The wind had turned colder. It carried the bite of snow. She pulled out her phone and tapped out another message. "Need to update documents. Friday morning, still good? M." The reply came quick. "Yes, full estate planning suite, just like we discussed." Alan Martha tucked the phone away. The house behind her glowed golden, voices rising in pretend harmony. The woman inside pretending to be host, the man pretending not to notice. But out here, in the honest dark, Martha felt the most grounded she'd been in months. She whispered to no one, "Soon," and walked back in, smiling. Maple Falls, November 23rd, Thanksgiving Day. The turkey was glazed to perfection, the table was set like a magazine spread, and Casey wore a cream cashmere sweater that still had its tag tucked discreetly behind her hairline. The silverware sparkled. The centerpiece was faux eucalyptus and dried oranges, artfully laid across a burlap runner. Her phone sat propped on a stand, angled to capture the perfect wide shot of her hospitality. "Smile," Casey chirped as she triggered the timer and leaned over Greg's shoulder. He gave a weak grin. Martha didn't bother. She stood at the far end of the table, smoothing the napkins she'd ironed that morning. No one had asked her to. No one ever did. Casey clapped her hands once. "Let's gather, everyone. Mom's stuffing is practically famous." Martha blinked at that. Mom's? She'd spent all morning in the kitchen, handling the bird, prepping the yams, baking her signature cornbread. Casey had filmed 2 Instagram stories, poured a bottle of pre-mixed sangria, and called it balance. Still, Martha said nothing. As the room filled, Greg's co-workers, a few neighbors, Casey's sister with her boyfriend who never removed his Bluetooth earpiece, Martha kept her movements small. She poured water, retrieved rolls, lit candles, every act invisible. She excused herself mid-meal to check on the pies in the garage fridge, but halfway down the hall, she stopped. Laughter floated from the half-open door to the guest bedroom, Casey's voice unmistakable, low and unfiltered. "Honestly, she's dead weight with a pension, like a live-in reminder that this house doesn't even belong to us." Muffled response. Then more from Casey. "She thinks cooking earns her rent. Greg's too guilt-tripped to see straight. I swear if she crochets one more grateful heart pillow, I'm gonna set it on fire." Martha stepped back softly, heels silent on the runner. Her mouth didn't move, but her fingers curled against her thigh. The pies were fine. The fridge hummed. The chill didn't reach her bones the way those words had. Back at the table, Greg raised his glass. "Just want to say thanks to my amazing wife for pulling off another perfect dinner." Martha glanced at the turkey, brined by her, the stuffing, her late husband's recipe, the sweet potatoes, still warm from her oven. Casey beamed like royalty. "And thank you all for being here," Greg continued, squeezing Casey's hand. "Means a lot." No one looked at Martha. She didn't toast. She didn't blink. Later, while passing the cranberry sauce, one of the neighbor's kids looked at her and said, "Hey, Marty, did you really make this pie?" "Marty," she echoed gently. "That's what Mom says we should call you," he said, cheerful. "It's like Grandma, but cooler." Martha forced a smile. "Right, very cool." She finished her meal in measured bites, barely tasting a thing. And when Casey poured herself another glass of wine, Martha excused herself again. This time, she went upstairs. The hallway smelled faintly of toasted cloves and bleach. Her iPad buzzed on the dresser, its screen still lit from earlier texts with Alan. A single new notification waited. Mortgage autopay terminated. Effective November 24th, 30-day grace window initiated. She tapped it open, read it twice, felt a quiet hum settle beneath her ribs. Outside, the kids were laughing. A football game played faintly from the living room. She could hear Casey calling out dessert orders like a caterer. "Pecan for table 3! Pumpkin for the allergic!" Martha powered down the iPad and set it back inside the drawer. Then she moved to the mirror and fixed the pin holding her hair. When she looked at herself this time, there was something steadier behind her eyes. She walked back down just as Greg was struggling to open a second bottle of wine. He looked up, gave her a sheepish smile. "You okay, Mom?" She met his eyes, calm and unbothered. "Never better, sweetheart." Casey looked over, then quickly away. Martha sat down, folded her hands, and waited. Because the celebration might have been today, but the reckoning, that started tomorrow. Maple Falls, November 24th, Friday morning. The envelope was cream-colored and innocuous, marked with the bank's logo and a faint warning. "Important account change notification, immediate attention required." Casey found it wedged between Black Friday flyers on the hallway table. She opened it while sipping coffee, still in her robe, hair tied in a high bun. The first line sent her heart skittering. "This notice confirms termination of auto pay for mortgage loan ending in -4832. She read it again, then a third time, now pacing. "Greg!" she called, voice sharp, breaking the morning's calm. "Come here! What the hell is this?" Greg shuffled into the hallway wearing socks and a hoodie, one AirPod still in. "What?" Casey thrust the paper at him. "Did you cancel the mortgage payment?" He read it once, then frowned. "Number, it's probably a mistake." Casey narrowed her eyes. "Then why is the 30-day clock already started?" Greg looked again. No typo, no vague phrasing. Just the facts. Auto pay canceled. Manual payments required. Grace period ends December 24th. "You should call the bank," Casey hissed. "You mean we should?" Greg shot back, tension mounting. From the kitchen came the soft sound of a spoon against ceramic. They turned in unison. Martha sat at the breakfast table, swirling a tea bag in her cup. Steam rose gently. Her reading glasses perched low on her nose. She didn't look up. "Did you do something?" Casey asked, her voice suddenly cautious. Martha took a sip, set the cup down, and folded her hands in her lap. "I've just been taking care of my affairs," she said, her tone flat. Greg stepped forward. "Mom, what does that mean?" She met his eyes. "It means the things that were mine to manage are now being managed. That's all." "That's not all," Casey snapped, voice rising. "You co-signed that mortgage. You're responsible." Martha gave a quiet, almost imperceptible smile. "I was." Greg rubbed his temple. "Why now? Why cancel it without telling us?" There was a silence so thick it seemed to swallow the light in the room. Martha spoke evenly. "Do you remember the night you lost your job?" Greg's shoulders sank. "Of course." "I offered to help. You both looked exhausted. New baby, new house. I stepped in, gave my name, my credit, my savings." "You said you wanted to," Casey interrupted. "I did, because I believed family stepped in when it mattered." Martha picked up her tea again, but then that became expected. Quietly, no discussion, no thank yous, just deposits leaving my account every month. Greg opened his mouth, then shut it. Casey was less composed. "You could have told us you needed to stop. We would have figured something out." Martha set her cup down again. "But you never asked if I could keep going, or if I wanted to." The air in the kitchen was thick with boiled resentment. Greg sat heavily on a stool. "So what now? You're just leaving us to figure it out?" Martha's voice stayed calm. "You're adults. You'll figure it out." Flashback. Greg in 2016 hunched over the kitchen table with papers everywhere. Casey pacing, eyes rimmed red, muttering about missed maternity payments. Martha handing over her checkbook. "I'll co-sign. It'll buy you breathing room." Back then, Casey had cried, thanked her, hugged her hard. That hug was the last one Martha remembered receiving from her. In the present, Casey's voice cracked. "You're really doing this? Over one bad night?" Martha looked at her. Really looked. "This isn't about one night," she said. "It's about every morning since, every invisible slight, every half-smile that felt like a leash." Greg whispered, "Mom." But Martha was already standing. She rinsed her cup, dried it, set it upside down on the rack. "I've done enough," she said softly. Casey stared, blinking. "And what? Are you just going to walk away?" Martha paused at the kitchen threshold. Her hand rested on the doorframe. "I'm not walking," she said. "I'm reclaiming." And then she left the room, not bothering to shut the door behind her. The envelope fluttered to the floor. The only sound left was the ticking of the kitchen clock, and in Casey's chest, the start of panic that no apology would fix. Maple Falls, November 26th, Sunday afternoon. Martha zipped her final suitcase shut, the navy one with the broken handle she refused to replace. The upstairs hallway was quiet, eerily so. Downstairs, muted voices drifted like steam under a locked door. Casey's was rising. Greg's was trying to stay level. "She can't just leave," Casey hissed. "She can't." Martha rolled the suitcase gently to the top of the stairs and paused. She took one last look down the hallway, lined with frames of a family she once thought she belonged to. Some photos even had her in them. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't need to. By the time she stepped outside, Camilla's SUV was already parked at the curb, trunk popped, trunk blanket folded neat. Camilla got out, offered no questions, just took the handle and lifted the suitcase in. "You sure?" she asked gently. Martha nodded. "I booked the unit months ago." Camilla arched an eyebrow but didn't press. "Then let's go." Inside the house, Casey's voice cracked through the front window. "We'll just call her. We'll explain. We'll tell her we'll take over the payments. We'll ask nicely." Greg didn't answer right away. His silence stretched until it folded into the sound of a screen door slamming shut. At the Willows, an upscale retirement village nestled just outside Maple Falls, the afternoon light poured soft through bay windows lined with spider plants and orchids. The air smelled like lemon polish and cinnamon tea. Martha's new cottage had 2 bedrooms, a private patio, and a reading nook with shelves just begging to be filled. She stood by the window while Camilla made tea. Her phone buzzed again. Casey, then Greg, then Casey again. Martha didn't silence it. She simply turned the phone face down. She pulled open the side drawer of her new kitchen island. Inside sat a worn folder labeled Home Equity, Whitaker Residence, 2016. At the bottom was Greg's signature, shaky with hope, beneath Martha's own. She texted Alan, "Initiate full audit. Time-stamped copies to Greg. Registered delivery." His reply came back within 2 minutes. Understood, already queued. And Martha, well played. Later that night, after the tour, the tea, the unpacking, and a brief orientation with a nurse named Donna, who wore socks with foxes on them, Martha stepped into her new bedroom. The closet was empty. The dresser still had that faint woodshop scent. She opened the top drawer. Inside was a small envelope from the front desk, a welcome note and a card with her new mailing address. No mortgage, no leaks, no unpaid debt, just space. She sat on the bed and opened the lockbox she'd carried in her purse the whole way. Inside was the check from the sale of her old house, cashed 5 months ago when she'd quietly listed it after moving in with Greg and Casey. A 6-figure deposit had gone directly into a trust, untouched, protected, reserved. She had never planned to stay forever. She had only planned to help, but help had turned into permanence, and permanence had turned to entitlement. Back at Greg and Casey's, reality bloomed like rot. Casey stood in their living room, phone clutched tight. "I'm not asking her again," she snapped. "She's being petty." Greg sat on the arm of the couch, staring at his phone. "It's not petty," he said. "It's final." He looked at the email from the bank again, then the new message from Alan, the lawyer. Line by line, it listed every dollar borrowed against the house's equity and every clause that confirmed Martha's right to withdraw at will. There it was, in Greg's own handwriting. This agreement does not bind the co-signer to indefinite support. He had signed it the week his severance ran out. Casey had skimmed it. "She played us," Casey said bitterly. "No," Greg muttered. She protected herself. They both looked around at the silent house. The dining table was still set with their expensive holiday linens. The chairs were full 2 days ago. Now they sat empty. Casey's phone rang again. She didn't recognize the number. She didn't answer. The voicemail that followed began not with Martha's voice, but Alan's. "This message serves as official notification that Mrs. Whitaker is no longer legally tied to the mortgage in any support capacity. You are fully liable." Greg stood up. "She's not coming back," he said almost in awe. And somewhere across town, Martha sipped her tea and smiled, not with triumph, but with peace. The chairs might be empty now, but she was finally full. Maple Falls, November 28th, Tuesday afternoon. Casey's Facebook post went up at 2:17 p.m., crafted with just enough passive aggression to look like sadness, just enough self-pity to masquerade as concern. The photo was of their front porch, gray skies overhead, a lone pumpkin wilting by the door. Her caption, "When your own family turns their back on you, during the holidays no less. After all we did, after all we sacrificed, some people forget blood comes with obligations." By 4 p.m., it had over 60 likes and 3 dozen comments, a mix of confused sympathy and suburban politeness. "Oh no, Casey, what happened? You deserve so much better. Ugh, the elderly can be so entitled these days." One woman even offered a spare room if things really went south. Casey liked that one twice, accidentally, then again for emphasis. What she didn't know was that one of those likes came from Linda Jean, a woman who'd played bridge with Martha for a decade before COVID shut the game room down. Linda texted Martha a screenshot and a 2-word note. "You okay?" Martha, seated on her patio at the Willows with a pot of chrysanthemum tea and a library book on her lap, tapped out a simple reply. "Very." Let them talk. But Linda didn't let it go. Within 48 hours, Martha's side of the story started circulating in a private community forum called Maple Falls Speaks. It was meant for lost pets, roofer recommendations, and noisy teenagers. But now it carried a thread titled, "When You Raise a Child, Not a Partner." The original post was from someone named Just an Observer, but the phrasing was unmistakably Linda's. What do you call a woman who signs a mortgage to help her son, lives in his home rent-free, cooks their meals, and gets called dead weight by her daughter-in-law? Apparently, you call her a burden. Shame on anyone who treats their elders like liabilities. The post blew up, quietly, efficiently. Screenshots of Casey's Thanksgiving perfect hosting photos were placed beside quotes from her Facebook rant. Dots connected themselves. Someone from Casey's company HR department, who was also in the group, sent an internal flag. A pending promotion, meant to be announced before Christmas, was suddenly put on hold pending review. Greg, meanwhile, was unraveling in slower threya. His credit score, once rescued by Martha's signature, dropped below 600 in a matter of weeks. The mortgage bill now fell fully on him. Casey's parents, when asked for a loan, declined with stiff smiles and changed the subject to Florida condo prices. Their second car got repossessed. Greg missed 2 consecutive payments. A third would trigger collection calls. He didn't tell Casey, not yet. Back at the Willows, Martha met with Alan in the quiet of the reading lounge. She placed a handwritten list in front of him, neatly folded. No flourishes, no dramatic speeches. The top line read, "Remove Greg and Casey Whitaker as named beneficiaries." Below that, "Create scholarship trust in memory of Charles Whitaker for working grandmothers pursuing late-stage education or caregiving certification." Alan looked up. "That's poetic." Martha offered a dry smile. "It's overdue." He tapped the paper. "Want to keep Greg's claws for a single heirloom? Sometimes that says more." She nodded. "The old recipe box, but with conditions." Alan arched an eyebrow. "What kind of conditions?" Martha leaned back in her chair. "He earns it, or he doesn't." Later that night, after her bath and 2 episodes of murder, she wrote, Martha logged into her own Facebook account for the first time in months. Her notifications had exploded. Dozens of friend requests, messages from women in their 50s and 60s sharing their own stories of invisibility, of silent support turned into assumed servitude. She didn't post anything, just liked one comment from a woman named Nora. "You taught them grace. They mistook it for permission." At Greg and Casey's, the lights were off early. The pile of unopened mail was growing on the console table. Greg sat on the couch with his head in his hands, Casey scrolling with trembling fingers. "She's turned people against us," Casey muttered. Greg didn't respond, because deep down he knew the truth. Martha hadn't turned anyone. She'd simply stopped hiding the truth, and the world took care of the rest. Maple Falls, December 2nd, Saturday afternoon. The knock came at exactly 4 p.m. Sharp, practiced, as if she'd stood outside rehearsing it. Martha opened the door of her cottage at the Willows to find Casey on the other side, holding a Tupperware of something beige and lukewarm. "I brought your favorite," Casey said too brightly. "Chicken divan." Martha tilted her head. "That's not my favorite." Casey blinked. "Well, it used to be. You made it every Easter." "I made it because your mother always brought dry ham. Not because I liked it." The silence stretched. "May I come in?" Casey asked, voice smaller now. Martha stepped aside slowly. "You're already halfway there." Inside, the cottage was warm and sunlit, the fireplace flickering soft amber across the cream walls. Casey looked around with a mix of judgment and disbelief, noting the high ceilings, fresh lilies, the faint scent of wood polish and citrus. "So, this is where the money went," she muttered under her breath, barely audible. Martha heard it, chose not to respond. She gestured to the table, already set for 2 with polished silver and cloth napkins. Casey smiled awkwardly. "You didn't have to go all out." "I didn't," Martha said simply. "This is how I eat now." They sat. The meal was polite but hollow. Salmon, steamed asparagus, wine neither woman touched. Then Casey leaned in. "Listen," she said, drawing out the word. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. About everything." Martha looked up but said nothing. "I didn't mean what I said at Thanksgiving. I was stressed. We both were." But I know you love Greg and the kids and this. She waved her hand vaguely. This feud isn't helping anyone. Martha slowly placed her fork down. You think this is a feud? Casey pressed on, flustered. I just mean, you're family, and families fight. But they forgive too, and you've always been the bigger person. So I figured, her smile thinned, you'll fix this for us, right? There it was. The tell, not we'll make it right, not how can we rebuild trust, just you'll fix it. Martha didn't flinch. No, she said. Casey's smile cracked. What? I won't reinstate the payments, I won't rewrite my will, and I won't pretend this is anything but the consequence of your choices. Casey stared at her. I said I was sorry. No, Martha corrected. You said words. You didn't ask what it cost. You didn't own a thing. A flush rose in Casey's cheeks. You're being vindictive. A bitter old woman playing power games. Martha nodded, as if confirming something to herself. There it is. The truth always wriggles out when your script runs dry. Casey stood abruptly, chair legs scraping the floor. You're unbelievable. I've been called worse, Martha said, by better people. Casey's hands trembled as she clutched her coat. I tried. Don't say I didn't. I won't, Martha said quietly. I'll say you came, you spoke, and then you revealed yourself. Again. Casey left without taking the Tupperware. The door shut with a finality that made even the clock pause. Later that night, Martha stood on her patio, watching the first snow begin to fall. The lights from her cottage glowed soft behind her, and for a moment, she let the cold bite gently at her cheeks. Then she pulled on her coat and walked 2 blocks down the winding path of the willows to the visitor lot. Greg was already waiting inside his car, engine idling. He stepped out, older than he'd looked last time, creased in new places, eyes dull. Hi, Mom, Martha nodded. Walk? They strolled slowly through the community garden, now dormant under frost. I heard Casey came, he said. She did. And? She said sorry, then asked if I'd undo the consequences, then called me bitter. Greg exhaled. She means well. She's just overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed, Martha said. I didn't make it someone else's burden. They walked another 20 steps before Martha stopped near a frozen pond. Why are you really here, Greg? He didn't answer at first. Then finally, because part of me hoped you'd see that I'm trying, that I still care. I know you care, Martha said gently. I just don't think you know how to act like it when it counts. He winced. She looked at him with steady sadness. I hoped you'd be the exception. Turns out you're just the echo. Greg's mouth opened, then closed. I can't fix what I enabled, Martha said, only what I control now. A long pause, then she turned to him fully. This is your last walk as my son with open access. After this, we speak only when effort meets accountability, not apology. Greg looked down. I understand, he whispered. No, she said, but maybe one day you will. She turned and walked back to her cottage. Greg didn't follow. Maple Falls, December 4th, Monday morning. The fog hadn't lifted yet, and neither had the ache in Martha's chest. Not a painful ache, just one of clarity, the kind that settled in after the last word's been spoken and no one's left to interrupt it. She stood in her new kitchen, stirring oatmeal that would go cold. On the counter beside her, a manila envelope stamped Final Disbursement Request, Confirmation Pending. The shared account, once Greg and Martha's fallback safety net, was down to a few $100s. She'd left it open too long, not because she forgot, because she'd hoped, and now she was done hoping. Her iPad buzzed. From Alan Dent, Eskinen, disbursement request processed. Account closure initiated. Legal notice of disassociation delivered electronically and via certified mail. You are no longer financially tethered. Anywhere. Martha tapped once to acknowledge receipt. Then, without a word, she slid her finger to delete the shared login info from her password manager. Across town, the news broke like a dropped plate. Greg had just returned from the bank, his voice tight, his posture folded, as he held out the notice to Casey. Foreclosure timeline starts in 90 days. Casey stared at the letter as if reading it backward. There has to be something we can do. She can't just— She did, Greg cut in, voice hollow. The bank needs proof of income or a cosigner. We have neither. Casey picked up her phone with shaking hands. I'll text her. Don't, Greg said. She sent a letter. He walked to the entryway table and picked up a sealed envelope addressed in Allen's firm's font. A crisp legal form inside. 2 pages. Not cold, just final. It began, "To Greg and Casey Whitaker, this letter serves as a formal notice that, effective immediately, Martha Whitaker severs all financial and fiduciary entanglement with the mortgage loan referenced below." It ended. Further contact regarding financial support is neither necessary nor welcome. All decisions are irrevocable. All ties are now legal history. Casey sat down hard on the edge of the couch. She really thinks we'll just fade. She doesn't care if we do, Greg muttered, rubbing his temple. And maybe she's right. Back at the Willows, the fog outside was beginning to lift. Martha wrapped her robe tighter and stepped out onto her small patio, where her neighbor Ruby was trimming the last of the frostbitten mums. "You look like a woman who just emptied her pockets and found peace instead of lint," Ruby said, grinning without looking up. "I closed the old account," Martha said, "and sent the last letter." Ruby clucked her tongue. "Took you long enough?" Martha chuckled, just once. "I kept thinking I'd miss something. And? I only missed myself." Ruby leaned her clippers against the railing. "You ever think of doing something with what's left? Not for them, for someone who needs it?" Martha's brow lifted. That night, she lay awake longer than usual, the envelope from her trust account on the side table like a sleeping creature, quiet but not done breathing. At 11:14 p.m., she sat up, slipped on her slippers, and padded to her desk. She opened her laptop and logged into her banking portal. 3 tabs later, she was on the website of the Harriet House for Mothers in Transition, a shelter she'd heard of from Ruby. She clicked through the donation forms, read the testimonials, watched the short video of a young mother named Imani saying, "This shelter gave me back my name." Martha stared at that sentence for a long time. Then she clicked, "Speak to a donor advisor." By morning, her trust account had a new directive: $90,000 to be earmarked for housing transition grants and night shift child care services. The confirmation email arrived at 6:07 a.m. Subject, "Transfer complete. Welcome to Harriet House Legacy Donors. Dear Mrs. Whitaker, you've just changed the story for someone else's next chapter." She didn't cry. She just let herself exhale. The next day, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But something made her swipe. A small voice on the other end. Gentle, grateful, tired. "Hi? Is this Martha Whitaker? I just wanted to say thank you. I got the grant. I start nursing classes next week." Martha smiled, her voice steady. "Then I guess I just got a return on love." She ended the call and stared at the rising sun beyond her patio glass. The account was empty. But Martha had never felt so full. Maple Falls, December 6th, Wednesday morning. Martha opened her contacts list and scrolled slowly. Thumb steady, heart quieter than expected. She tapped Greg's name once, selected Remove from Favorites. Then, with a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, she clicked Block this caller. A second later, she did the same with Casey's. Then with the old family group chat titled Whitaker Holidays. She didn't delete the thread, just silenced it permanently. That was the morning she stopped waiting, stopped checking her phone, stopped building small, ridiculous hopes into missed calls and half-read texts. Instead, she walked to the community calendar posted by the main lobby and signed up for Thursday's grief group with a green Sharpie. No hesitation. That afternoon, a voicemail came through anyway. Blocked or not, it hit the digital archive before it bounced into oblivion. She spotted the transcript preview by accident. "Mom, it's me. Please, I'm scared. I'm so sorry. I miss you." Her thumb hovered, then tapped play. Greg's voice was thick, ragged, like it came from someone sleep-deprived and unraveling. "I know I screwed up. I let her talk for me. I let things happen I should have stopped. I thought, I don't know. I thought you'd always be there. I didn't realize how far gone we were until it all collapsed. A long breath, then a softer, cracking admission. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if you want me to. But I'm sitting in the car outside the library and it smells like your coat used to smell, that lavender and something else I never learned the name of, and God, Mom. I'm ashamed. I'm really, really ashamed. Click. That was the end of it. Martha didn't cry. She didn't call back, but she saved the voicemail to a folder labeled Greg, Real. The next morning, her therapist, Dr. Edna Sloan, poured 2 cups of tea without asking. Releasing isn't erasing, she said. It's just putting the box back on a shelf where it can't hurt you. Martha nodded. I think I kept the lid open too long. Because you loved him, Edna said, but love isn't a leash. And you're not abandoning him, you're simply refusing to bleed out again. Silence sat comfortably between them. Then Edna reached into her desk drawer and handed Martha a seedling wrapped in newspaper and twine. A tree? A sugar maple, Edna said. We give them to patients at transitional points. Growth, healing, reclamation, that sort of thing. Martha held the tiny sprout in her lap the rest of the session. That evening she dug a small hole near the back fence of her cottage, where the winter sun touched the soil longest. Ruby watched from her porch, holding a mug of cider, saying nothing. Martha knelt carefully, no gloves, no preamble, and planted the sapling with her bare hands. Once it was secure, she sat beside it on the ground, legs crossed, coat wrapped tightly. In her pocket was a folded letter, one she'd written the night before. Dear Greg, not for guilt, not for closure, just to speak without interruption. You were my joy, my challenge, my mirror. You were also my blind spot. I gave everything thinking it would shape you, but some shapes collapse under pressure instead of forming. Still, I loved you. I do. I always will. But I will not let that love cost me the rest of my life. This is not a punishment. It's a boundary. I hope someday you live into the man I glimpsed behind the boy. Until then, I am no longer reachable. She folded it again, tighter this time, and tucked it into a mason jar beside the roots of the sugar maple, buried it like a time capsule no one would dig up. Later that night the wind howled across the willows, and the frost on her window bloomed like lace. Inside, Martha sat curled in her reading chair, blanket over her knees, a new book in hand. The fire crackled, and her phone, clean, silent, unburdened, stayed face down beside her tea. Maple Falls, December 9th, Saturday night. Snow feathered down gently over the willows, layering rooftops like a secret too soft to scream. Inside her cottage, Martha sat cross-legged on the floor, sifting through her digital files, clearing out what no longer belonged. She clicked open one folder she'd forgotten she created. Label, Audio, Thanksgiving. Timestamp, November 23rd, 6:43 p.m. She remembered then how the baby monitor in the hallway had synced months ago to her iPad without anyone noticing. It had been intended for convenience when she watched the baby. She'd left it alone afterward, no harm, no foul, until that night. Martha clicked play. Casey's voice crackled through with cold clarity. Honestly, she's dead weight with a pension. Like a live-in reminder, this house doesn't belong to us. Then the muffled laughter, the casual cruelty. And Greg, not in the room at all. Martha didn't flinch. She watched the sound wave dance across the screen like proof, not just of the insult, but of something deeper. A performance when no one was supposed to be listening. She should have deleted it. Instead, she clipped the audio, trimmed the static, and sent it to a temporary email address she'd created weeks ago. No signature, no trace. Then attached it to a video of the Thanksgiving table. The laughter, the performative grace. Subject line, you should hear what she says when you're not in the room. Recipient, greg.whitaker.business@gmail.com. She hit send. Then she walked into the kitchen and made tea. The next morning, the fire was just catching when Martha's phone buzzed. Not from Greg, from Ruby. Text only, you're trending, followed by a link. Martha opened it. There, posted anonymously in a private parenting group and already shared thousands of times, was the clip. captioned brutally, POV. Your DIL badmouths you while feeding the grandchild you pay the mortgage for. Dead weight with a pension. It had sound. Video. A photo stitched in from Casey's Thanksgiving Instagram post, layered perfectly. The comments were savage. And she thinks she's the victim? Lady, be glad you're out. Let her drown in her own fakeness. This is why Miles get a bad rap, because too many stay quiet when they should go viral. Martha took one slow sip of tea, then closed the window. She didn't like viral. She didn't like loud. But sometimes, silence just wasn't enough. At a WeWork 2 towns over, Greg was mid-email when his phone vibrated off the desk. The clip hit his inbox, just as the HR notification did. He listened once, sat still, then again, and again. His hand started to shake. Not because he hadn't heard the tone before, because it had been so familiar, he'd stopped hearing it at all. And now? Now it was public. His co-workers sent him the meme. A gif of Casey smirking at Thanksgiving with subtitles, "Smile for the followers while you bury your benefactor." He dropped his phone. That night, Casey was screaming. Not at Greg, at her phone, at her comment section, at the sudden silence from her boss who hadn't returned her email. "I'm being targeted. This is slander. You're just sitting there?" Greg stared at the TV, volume muted. News flickered across the screen. Nothing could drown her out. "You think this is funny? You think my job can take this kind of garbage PR?" "No," Greg said, "but I think you finally got recorded saying the part you usually leave out." Casey turned. "Excuse me? You don't hate my mother," Greg said slowly. "You hate the mirror she holds up." Back at the Willows, Martha sat by the fire, her iPad in her lap. The audio file still lived on her desktop. She dragged it to the trash, paused, then emptied the bin. She didn't need proof anymore. She had peace. Maple Falls, December 11th, Monday afternoon. The knock was soft this time. No urgency. Just a hollow thud against Martha's cottage door, like someone already knew the answer might be silence. She opened it anyway. Greg stood on the other side. No hoodie, no AirPods. Just a button-down shirt with the collar wilted and a plastic grocery bag hanging from one hand like he forgot why he brought it. "Hi," he said, voice flat, worn. "Can I come in?" Martha held the door open but not wide. Greg stepped inside slowly, as if the warmth of her cottage might collapse him. "I brought cranberry scones from that place on 9th you used to like." She glanced at the bag. "They stopped using real cranberries 3 years ago." Greg gave a weak smile. "That tracks." He moved toward the armchair but stopped short. Didn't sit. "Can we talk?" Martha walked past him, picked up the kettle and filled it with water. No nod. No invitation. Just movement. Greg remained standing, hands in his jacket pockets now. "Casey's gone," he said. Packed a duffel and went to her sister's. Martha didn't turn. "Did you ask her to?" But I didn't ask her to stay, either." She placed 2 mugs on the counter. "I heard the clip," Greg said quietly. "I know it was you who sent it, or maybe I don't. Maybe it was some miracle of the internet." Martha finally faced him. It was never about exposure. It was about truth, and whether it mattered to anyone but me. Greg nodded. "I let her get away with too much, for too long." "You let yourself get away with too little," Martha said, pouring the tea. "You shrank instead of choosing." Greg's voice cracked. "I didn't know how to choose between you and my marriage." "You weren't choosing between people," Martha said. "You were choosing between silence and decency." He flinched like the sentence hit bone. She walked to the table and set both mugs down. "Saturday." Looked at him, not warmly, not coldly, just fully. Greg sat opposite like a child summoned by a principal. "I don't want money," he said. "Not now, not ever again. I don't want to be this version of myself anymore." Martha sipped her tea, then stopped being him. "I want a second chance," he said. "Not for anything material. Just for space, for family, for repair." Martha stirred her tea. "Repair doesn't begin with asking. It begins with demonstrating." I've been trying to, Greg whispered. I started therapy. I've applied for 2 new jobs. I'm staying at a friend's place. I've cut off Casey's access to my accounts. He paused. I even called Dad's old boss, just to ask what kind of man he really was. That caught her. For half a breath, Martha blinked slower. Greg reached into his coat and pulled out a single sheet of paper, creased, folded, handled too much. He slid it across the table. Martha opened it, a scanned copy of a sticky note, Charles's handwriting. You can't carry everyone, but you can teach them how to walk. He wrote it for me, Greg said. Senior year. I never understood it until now. Martha set the note down. Trust, she said softly, was what I gave you freely. It's what you sold cheaply. Greg didn't argue. He just nodded. Silence settled again. After a minute, Martha stood, walked to the cabinet, and pulled down a tin. She spooned a different kind of tea into a second pot, her personal blend, the one she only brewed for company that meant something. Greg looked up. I'm not promising anything, she said. There is no going back, only forward, and forward will be earned. He nodded again. Fair. She poured the new tea, sat down again. They drank in silence, and for the first time in months, Greg didn't reach for his phone. Maple Falls, December 16th, Saturday morning. The ground was still hard in places, but the sun had warmed the topsoil just enough. Martha pressed her trowel in, feeling the give of earth she'd coaxed into softness over weeks. Around her, laughter rippled, a sound she'd almost forgotten could belong to her world. I told you, Ruby called from a few rows down, waving a seed packet. Marigolds are bossy, you crowd them and they sulk. Martha grinned. They must have learned it from the women planting them. The Willows Gardening Club had started with 3 women and a half-dead rosemary bush. Now it had a name, laminated ID cards, and a waiting list. Every Thursday morning, they gathered in flannel jackets and sun hats, dragging wagons full of compost, tomato cages, and gossip. It wasn't flashy, but it was hers. That afternoon, as she trimmed back frost-bitten vines, Martha saw someone new sitting on the garden bench. Early 20s baby carrier beside her, textbook open on her lap. A girl too young to be that tired. Martha wiped her hands and walked over. Botany or punishment? The girl looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. Biochem. Punishment with homework. Martha chuckled. I taught GED classes for years. You speak like someone who's trying to rewrite her story. The girl hesitated. I'm Jess. I just moved in with my grandma here after... She gestured to the baby carrier. Life. Martha nodded. It tends to rearrange things. They sat for 20 minutes. Jess talked. Martha listened. The girl's story tumbled out. No self-pity, just grit. Dropped out after pregnancy, waitressing nights, applying to nursing school with 0 margin for error. I got in, Jess said, but no aid came through. So I wait. Again. Martha didn't say anything then, just pressed a folded note into Jess's palm before leaving. Talk to Donna at the front desk. You'll start in January, books covered, childcare included. That night, Martha dug out an old photo, black and white, grainy, taken by a stranger outside a courthouse. She was 22, wearing a suit 3 sizes too big and holding Greg like he was both shield and reason. Back then, no one had helped. Just quiet judgment and long lines. She didn't regret it, but she never forgot it either. 2 days later, a local paper did a soft feature piece on the Willows community outreach. Ruby had mentioned the garden club. Someone else mentioned the scholarship fund. The article ran with a photo of Martha standing beside the sugar maple she'd planted. The grandmother who gave back. Byline. One woman's quiet revolution through plants, patience, and no second chances wasted. Martha didn't expect the attention. Or the flowers that showed up anonymously outside her door the next morning, tagged only with, "For the seeds you plant in people too." She left the article folded on her table, half read. Late that afternoon, another knock came. Greg. But this time, no groceries, no excuses. He stood straighter, cleaner. His coat was frayed at the cuffs but zipped. His eyes held something unfamiliar. Containment. I saw the article, he said, smiling awkwardly. That picture of you with the tree, I remember that look. You used to have it after you fixed things no one knew were broken. Martha leaned in the doorway. This isn't a visit about fixing anything, I hope. Greg shook his head. Number just wanted to see where the roots finally went. She stepped aside, this time without pause. They sat on the porch. No tea, no lectures, just silence. Greg looked out at the soil beds, the daffodil shoots already pushing through the mulch. You ever think about writing all this down? The real version, not the one in that article. Martha didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her sweater pocket and handed him something small, folded in thirds, yellowed at the edges. It was the original sticky note. You can't carry everyone, but you can teach them how to walk. Greg stared at it for a long time. I'd forgotten his handwriting. I hadn't, Martha said. Some things you carry, not because they weigh you down, but because they kept you alive. He nodded, blinking hard. And for the first time, Martha touched his shoulder. Gently, once. Maple Falls, December 19th, Tuesday afternoon. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of lemon polish and printer ink. Martha sat across from Alan Dent, reading glasses perched low on her nose, a pen tapping once against her folder. The late light through the blinds striped the desk in slats of gold and dust. Alan slid the document forward. This is the final revision. Martha flipped to the last page without looking at the others. She already knew them. She'd read them enough times to recite her own obituary by heart. It was the clause she'd spent the most time with, the one she wanted airtight, precise, unshakable. She ran her finger across the final paragraph. To my son, Greg Whitaker, I leave my handwritten recipe box, containing family recipes, notes, and annotations dating back to 1971, only upon verified completion of 100 hours of volunteer service at a registered shelter or food bank. If this condition is not met within 1 calendar year of this document's execution, said item shall be permanently donated to the Harriet House for Mothers in Transition. She exhaled once. Alan watched her carefully. Still sure about this? Yes, Martha said. This box taught me how to feed people without feeding their entitlement. If he wants it, he'll learn the difference. Alan made a small, impressed noise and turned the page. Casey? No mention. Just confirming. She'll contest. Let her try, Martha said, voice steel flat. The next morning, Martha placed the recipe box on a high shelf in her linen closet. It was wooden, worn soft with time. Inside were index cards with slanted cursive, some stained with flour or oil, notes in Charles's handwriting tucked inside the margins, scribbles from a much younger Greg where he'd added more chocolate to a cookie recipe. She shut the door on it, locked it. Across town, Casey was already screaming into a phone. I'm his wife. I should be included in any estate planning. It's marital property by proximity. The probate attorney, tired, brisk, cut in. You're not listed in the will. You are not financially tied to any assets. You have no legal standing. But she targeted me. Not legally relevant. Casey hung up mid-sentence and flung the remote across the room. It shattered into 3 pieces near the air mattress she'd been sleeping on since her sister demanded rent. 2 days later, the story broke. It began as a sidebar in the local Digital Gazette. Will with a clause. Maple Falls retiree's recipe box becomes conditional legacy. The reporter, nosy but accurate, had reached out to Harriet House for comment. The nonprofit responded with a short, glowing statement. Martha Whitaker has already changed lives through her anonymous donations. This condition simply formalizes what she's always believed, that legacy should be earned, not assumed. The story picked up steam. Gardening groups reposted it. Women's shelters praised it. One meme made the rounds, a black and white photo of a flour-dusted index card that read, "Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's who you demand others become." Casey tried to post a rant. It backfired, again. The comments skewered her. Still trying to inherit what you never appreciated. Volunteering. 100 hours is punishment now? Maybe if you'd served soup instead of side-eye. At the Willows, Martha walked to the front garden with her thermos and sat on the bench beside the sugar maple, now staked upright and wrapped against winter wind. Ruby ambled over and handed her a newspaper, folded to the opinion page. "I think you've got fans," she said, grinning. Martha skimmed the headline. "Earning the Box, a lesson in love, conditions, and consequence." She smiled, folded the page into her coat pocket. That afternoon, a letter arrived by courier. Handwritten, no return address, just the words, "For when you're ready to believe me." Inside, a copy of Greg's volunteer registration at Harriet House. Start date circled. No flourish, no plea, just the facts. Maple Falls, January 22nd, Monday morning. Steam rose in soft tendrils from the industrial sink as Greg rinsed another tray of plastic lunch containers. The shelter's kitchen was loud with Monday energy, toddlers crying, someone bumping into a cart, a volunteer shouting over the radio. It was chaos, but it was also quiet in a strange way. The kind of quiet you feel when no one's watching you perform, when the work is real, when your presence matters only as much as your presence delivers. Greg didn't wear a name tag anymore. Everyone already knew him. "Hey, Whitaker," called Denise, the shift manager, wiping sweat off her brow. "Those lunches out by 11? "Yes, ma'am." That had been the first thing Martha taught him, though he never knew it then. When in doubt, do the job that needs doing. No commentary, no credit required. He scrubbed his hands for a full minute longer than necessary, as if the heat and soap could keep boiling off the man he used to be. From across the community room, a little girl with mismatched barrettes waved. "Mr. G, you forgot the juice again." Greg laughed, held up a Capri Sun in silent apology, then jogged it over. The mother behind the girl, tired, grateful, nodded once. It was enough. 3 rows back in the audience, tucked behind a column, Martha sat in her pressed navy coat with gloved hands folded in her lap. The new community wing at Harriet House was complete. Painted walls, extra childcare rooms, and a cozy kitchenette with cinnamon candles flickering on the windowsill. She hadn't planned to come to the opening, but Ruby had insisted. It's not about legacy, it's about presence. The staff had asked Martha privately if they could name the new wing after her. She'd agreed, on one condition. No portrait, no pedestal, just the name. So, at the front of the room, mounted on brushed steel, the Whitaker wing, for new beginnings and clean slates, and beside it, in simple black lettering, donated in honor of lives given quietly, not loudly. Greg stood at the podium, his hands unusually still. A crisp shirt, slacks, and a tie that looked borrowed, but straight. He cleared his throat, then began. "I wasn't always the man I thought I'd be. And I definitely wasn't the man my mother raised." He paused. No script, just breathe. "I confused survival with sacrifice. I thought silence was safer than confrontation, and I mistook help for entitlement. But grace doesn't yell, it doesn't demand attention. It moves through the world like steam from a pot, quiet but changing the room." Someone in the audience sniffled. Greg looked up, almost directly toward Martha, but not quite. "I was raised by grace. I just didn't recognize it. Not until I saw it mirrored in the faces here, in the mothers who show up every day with nothing but effort and hope." He looked down, cleared his throat again. "This wing is named for my mother, but I'm not here to speak for her. I'm here because I finally listened." Martha didn't cry, not even a tear. But her hand tightened slightly around the leather of her purse, and her jaw eased in a way no one but her would have noticed. After the ceremony, she didn't approach him. She didn't need to. He stood near the snack table, laughing softly with a toddler clinging to his knee, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. She watched for 3 more minutes, then slipped out the side door. That evening, back at her cottage, she made chamomile tea and set the mug beside the reading chair. Outside, snow clung to the maple branches like lace, and the recipe box sat on the floor where she'd moved it days ago. She reached down and lifted it, opened the closet, cleared a space on the eye-level shelf, set it down carefully. She didn't unlock it, not yet, but she dusted it gently with the sleeve of her sweater, just enough to see the name etched into the wood, Whitaker Family Recipes. The box didn't look lonely anymore. It looked ready. Maple Falls, January 28th, Sunday evening. The smell of roasted butternut squash and rosemary bread filled Martha's cottage like an old hymn, warm, remembered, and stitched with care. Her table was set for 7. No heirloom china, no pretense, just wide bowls, linen napkins, and a flickering candle that smelled faintly of vanilla and cedar. The chairs filled slowly. Ruby arrived first, arms loaded with a pecan tart and a bottle of grocery store wine. Then came Jess, cheeks flushed from the cold, baby asleep against her chest in a sling. 2 volunteers from Harriet House followed, Denise and Corinne, laughing over something one of the kids had said earlier that day. Greg came last. He carried a foil-covered baking dish with both hands like it might tip at any second. "Sweet potato casserole," he said, placing it down. "No marshmallows. Just how you used to make it." Martha arched an eyebrow. "Used to make it when we were broke. You all hated it." Greg smiled faintly. "I was hoping your palate had softened." She didn't reply. But she offered him a spoon. He took the seat beside Corinne, across from Martha. The clatter of plates and the low hum of conversation folded easily around the room. Martha moved through it like a conductor, quiet but deliberate, pouring wine, cutting tart, laughing when Ruby teased her for hiding the good butter. It wasn't a celebration, it wasn't a statement, it was just dinner. Halfway through the meal, as the casserole made its second pass around the table, Denise leaned back and said, "So, Martha, you've got stories. You always let everyone else talk. Tell us something real." Martha paused, setting her fork down gently. She looked around at the table, faces full of effort, scars, healing. Then she began. "Charles and I once fixed a leaky kitchen pipe with duct tape and a prayer," she said. "We had no money, 1 income, and a baby who thought 2 a.m. was song hour." Soft laughter. She continued, "One night, after a week of working double shifts, I burned dinner, just blackened it until the smoke alarm gave up. I cried." He laughed. Then he said something I never forgot. Greg watched her closely now. Martha looked down at her napkin, then back up. He said, "It's not about what you serve. It's how you show up to the table." Silence for a beat. She picked up her glass. "I've shown up tired. I've shown up angry. And I've shown up alone. But I never stopped showing up, not even when people stopped noticing." Greg swallowed, jaw tight. Martha's eyes met his, but there was no heat there, just history. "Silence," she said, "can be survival. But it can also be permission. I spent a long time learning the difference." The room nodded, some slowly, some without realizing it. By dessert, the kitchen buzzed with easy cleanup and stolen tart crumbs. Jess rocked her baby softly in the corner, while Ruby folded napkins with the discipline of a retired drill sergeant. Greg stayed behind after the rest left, stacking plates by the sink. "I don't expect anything," he said softly. "I know," Martha replied, rinsing a glass. "I just wanted to be here. That's all." She handed him a towel. Then dry. They worked quietly, shoulder to shoulder, like they had decades ago. Over math homework, over illness, over growing up too fast. Later that night after he left, Martha opened her mail. Inside was the final notice from the bank. The house, Greg and Casey's, had been formally foreclosed, auctioned off 2 days ago. A new owner had already submitted renovation permits. The mortgage was no longer her burden, no longer her battle. She folded the letter once, cleanly, and placed it in her filing cabinet under settled. Then she walked back into the kitchen, poured the last of the wine, and looked at the dining table. The empty bowls, the crumbs, the candle burned down to a stub. There was no echo of past arguments, no cold shoulder, no misplaced gratitude, just peace. She turned off the lights, walked into her bedroom, and whispered to the dark, "They tossed out dinner once. But I made sure I never served it again, without dignity."